The Starz series Spartacus is a good case of not judging a book by its cover. What may seem like a series filled with poor CGI or highly explicit scenes, hiding beneath this a strong character-driven narrative, deep thematic exploration, some cases of excellent acting, and overall being a very immersive experience, with some reviews of it being clear evidence of so-called professional critics being cinematically and narratively illiterate, and the House of Ashur spin-off set to not help perceptions of the franchise from those unfamiliar. It's time for me to explain why you should watch Spartacus. It's first worth addressing what's often treated as a criticism, being what's seen as a superficial hook of violence and nudity. Frankly, this is no different from that in Game of Thrones, at least the early seasons, beyond the level of it, as the violence serves as a reminder of the merciless nature of the setting, and the sensual scenes often displaying characterization or the decadence of the society, as I'll go into later. The scenes that exist purely for eye candy being a lot rarer. On that mention of characterization, this is the reward for those ardent enough to get past the explicity or the admittedly weak first episode, as the writing puts an incredibly heavy focus on differing character motivations driving the plot, rather than random chance or laziness. What is quite a minor yet clear example would be Aulus receiving an injury that becomes integral but changing Spartacus's arc, rather than Ashur doing so, with the difference coming down to characterization, Ashur being both more careful as well as having greater need for things to go right when criticizing Aulus, with the latter's more reactionary attitude prompting him to check on their prisoner. A simple idea, but it says a lot this much care is put into even minor character moments, compared to the more common, lazy approach of modern writing that tends to be more so, a character does this because we need them to. Such characterization is also displayed in very efficient ways, without clumsy exposition. A clear example being Batiatus and Lucretia's conversation and introduction of Vettius at the start of Gods of the Arena, which establishes many building blocks of this prequel, such as the need to impress Tullius and Gannicus's importance to the ludus, while carrying the characterization of both Batiatus's impatience and need to put on a smile towards those he hates, along with Lucretia's faith in her husband's gladiators. I could go into far more detail on how well the series uses its characters efficiently for the story, but this would cause it to become quite long and tangential, and would instead recommend both videos by Random Film Talk, with hopes it will encourage him to make a video on vengeance, if not having already by the time this is released. The broader aspect of character writing to care for would be their depth, complexity, and growth, which are all in abundance here. One of the aspects worth the most praise in Spartacus would be its ability to make the villains equal parts despicable and sympathetic. Its best example of this being Ashur, being a very conniving, treacherous, and dishonourable man, yet things such as his desire to return to the arena, or tearful questioning on if any of the Brotherhood ever stood with him, make him do what he needs to, or even some later unforgivable actions, at least understandable, especially so with the tragedy within Gods of the Arena, in his desire to ever be treated with honour, being culled early, ironically from his loyalty in following his dominus. Ashur is far from the only example of this, with such complexities being extended to Batiatus, Lucretia, Elyphia, Glaber, and Salonius, as well as Tiberius serving as an inversion of the typical structure in having understandable, even sympathetic motivations for his actions, for gradually reaching the point of being completely deplorable. Similar things can be said of those aligned with Spartacus, who are neither wholly heroic or altruistic, with many character flaws being displayed, such as Spartacus's own disconcern towards those in the way of his vengeance, before having to focus on his role as a leader when vengeance is over. Pixis's initial lack of experience with manners outside of the arena or bedroom, and later desire for the more violent route, often being to his detriment. Or perhaps my favourite case of complex characterization amongst the gladiators, being Gannicus initially having the demeanour of a hedonist who lives in the moment, hiding his lack of purpose and later weight of guilt, before finding a cause to give his life deeper meaning, Another thing worth bringing up with the characters and setting would be the consequences that can come from fairly minor matters that evolve into fatalities, with few outside of those protected by historical accuracy being at risk at any moment, and even those historical figures getting out of situations through logical means, rather than raw plot armor. Though the series does have a few uses of the last moment save trope, it balances this with just as many moments of characters having no way out, with those saves helping build up tension on whether or not the characters can get out of a difficult situation. A good example being Agron's capture in season 4, having enough pause you could expect some providence, only for such hope to be subverted. Perhaps the most notable example of this would be the 10th episode, Party Favors, and the inevitable path crafted by it. Though the style of each season is consistent, each one also provides their own unique identity. Blood and Sand's primary focus on Spartacus has each episode make a strong impact on his character arc, while allowing the other characters to flourish within the events connecting to it, as everything builds towards an amazing finale. Gods of the Arena takes care to avoid many pitfalls of prequels, with the major focus Gannicus is given, helping make a lot of events uncertain, while informing how many of the characters and relationships in season 1 came to be in a manner that adds so much depth to these established characters, even more relatively minor ones, like Barca. Vengeance, as the name implies, puts heavy focus on how characters go about achieving it, be it simply taking a life, playing a long game, or switching power dynamics. War of the Damned places focus on the legitimacy and flaws of both sides, with Crassus acting as a very nuanced antagonist, who arguably gets more narrative focus than Spartacus himself this season, while having many traits that make him a greater parallel to Spartacus than any prior antagonist. With that talk of nuance, one of the greatest themes in the series is how it explores freedom. At first, this is as simple as the gladiators and slaves being dehumanized by the limits upon them, but this is given another layer in Gods of the Arena, as Batiatus being mistreated by those of higher social rank, and this being followed in successive seasons by Glaber being undermined by those in Rome, or Crassus being forced to make heavy sacrifices to uphold order, while being subordinate to Pompey, shows the Romans as being shackled, even if to a far less extent, by those perceived as their superiors. It also doesn't present total freedom as being without its cost, such as Nasia's initial disdain at being removed from a position that gave him security, or how many of the passionate celebrations in Spartacus's camp come as overt and grandiose as the orgies of their Roman enemies. This idea of the enslaved becoming the enslavers becomes more prominent as the series goes on, both through blatant ways, such as the freed slaves imprisoning Romans, or Spartacus's concerns of his army becoming what they hate, but also through smaller ways, such as how they aspire to rise to something greater, much like their Roman enemies, by going from a resistance force to an expanded army, with ideas of striking down all enemies. With it becoming apparent, the only way to remove such parallels is to escape to freedom. Such freedom, or lack thereof, is also explored internally, a clear case being Gannicus and Melita's feelings, wherein Gannicus has the freedom to choose his actions, yet emotions shackle him after an irrevocable event. The same being said of Crixus and Navia in Blood and Sand, or how the aftermath of the first season gave Enemeus limited options when labelled free, compared to a life he might have had should Batiatus's plans have succeeded. I would also cite this position elevates the importance of freedom above a similar narrative such as Braveheart, in which that was a case of a noble fighting against a more prominent noble, as opposed to whatever position Spartacus held in Thrace being so far removed from Rome that the narrative is truly that of the bottom of society resisting their oppressors, and is thereby far more inspiring, as well as free from the hypocrisy of many other revolutions being twisted to be this when they're not. Another strength of the series is the great casting and acting. The dialogue itself is also very well done, particularly in the manner of speech, having the general flow of Latin transliterated into English to help immerse the audience. It also has a good balance of famous faces such as John Hannah or Lucy Lawless, while giving some lesser known actors time to shine, an example being Peter Mensa, who was previously best known as the Messenger. Leonidas kicks in 300, and I'll come back to mention that film soon. Having the opportunity to showcase a subdued yet complex performance as Enemeus, whose initial serious enforcing of the rules has many layers of it, broken down as the series progresses, and of course, Andy Whitfield, given his swan song and career-defining performance as the flawed yet ambitious Spartacus within the first season. That said, it's worth addressing the recasting that had to happen due to Whitfield's unfortunate fate, and Leslie Ann Brandt's agent not securing her contract, with Spartacus and Naevia being recast, though not quite matching Whitfield's performance that he truly put his life into. Liam McIntyre did well in taking the reins. Cynthia Addai-Robinson as Naevia, however, is a far departure from the previous one, especially in how major of a shift her character arc between Blood and Sand and Vengeance is from off-screen events, though not quite as bad as many say, with the 180 of her ideals displaying some traits of borderline personality disorder or complex PTSD. The off-screen and sudden nature of most of this unfortunately makes Naevia become one of the weaker characters in an otherwise stellar selection, where even most of the minor characters have very understandable motivations, personalities, and complex alignment. That mention of Naevia brings me on to critiques that are either valid or worth unearthing. A common response in its early days was that Blood and Sand drew a lot from 300 in its presentation through the more graphic novel-style cinematography of the early episodes, and slow motion shots that continue throughout the entire series. The former has a more subjective, stylistic aspect, while the latter has a hit-or-miss nature. Some shots do linger more than necessary, but it for the most part offers clarity, or fully captures time standing still. The jump in the season 1 finale is a good example in allowing one to fully see the visual of Spartacus rising above those who would call themselves his superiors, whereas a great example of it showing a character's psychology is in the penultimate episode of the entire series, where the slow flow of wine both show how earth-shattering events surrounding Naevia have been, and the red liquid drawing her further back to it. As I mentioned earlier, season 1 also takes a while to get off the ground, with its first episode not helping with the allegations, with Spartacus acting fairly different from his established characterization later, a few actions being far less believable than the series' far more tight writing later, and it's overall taken until the end of episode 2 for signs of excellence to show, also though fairly minor, how Barca was hyped up compared to his feats as one of the best gladiators of the House of Batiatus, consistently fumbling against those with little martial training does nothing in preventing me from calling him the fraud of Carthage. A common point of contention would also be the latter two seasons, which while I wouldn't say reach the level of the first two, are still quite good overall, with Vengeance building upon the fallout of season 1's finale, affecting so many supporting characters, while War of the Damned's conclusion to so many character arcs has it contain excellent payoffs. That said, there are some elements to avoid them reaching the same level of quality, such as Glaber's reasons for listening to Lithia's account more so than Ashur, being a weak way to remove the latter from the plot, despite there being some additional layers to it. The one thing House of Ashur holds well in premise, being that there was more to gain from having Ashur stick around longer, and the occasional episodes of seasons 3 and 4 meandering a bit more than the tight writing of the first two. And yes, my decision on calling Gods of the Arena season 2 is final, given how it's essential viewing for understanding Gannicus. Still, what critique I have is few and far between, compared to the excellence it provides. The mention of House of Ashur makes it worth addressing the Beast of Carthage in the room, with it being ham-fisted in pushing a certain political representation, or to drop all formalities, it's woke DEI pandering at its most blatant. Comparing this to the original Spartacus series is where the latter yet again shows its quality. While you have things such as the historically Gallic Enemeus, women becoming active fighters, or the high level of homosexuality present, the original run of the series always took care in not breaking immersion as modern series tend to do. Those of more diverse racial backgrounds were chosen for what acting performance best fit the character character, and works with the reach Rome had in its slave trade. Naevia's transformation into a warrior still left her at a physical disadvantage against even the weakest gladiator, that had her focus more on dexterity, while Saxa's prowess fits with the portrayal of the Germanic people within the series, and some Roman accounts of the ferocity presented by even their women. And with what we know of some Romans, relationships like those of Agron and Nicaea are far from out of place, regardless of the creator's political stances or current attempts to defend House of Ashur. The main series truly understood to let any sort of representation be a natural part of the world, rather than to bend the world to it. To conclude, Spartacus is not only underrated, but one of the best television series out there through its complex characters, tightly woven plot, immersive prose and setting, along with avoiding the pitfalls of many series of its kind, to craft a titan upon the field of narrative television, despite being marred by the superficial aspects of low-budget CGI and rough opening episodes that offer a bountiful feast for those ardent enough to move forward. Gratitude for watching. Though my regular content is far removed from the sands of the arena, perhaps you'll find some worth in it, or encourage me to have videos on Spartacus become a more regular fixture.